Hi, I'm Miss Amber with the Calcasieu Parish Public Library System. Welcome to our Adulting 101 series, Things You Should Know. The first in our series is Sewing Basics. It's so easy to learn.
Hi, it's Miss Kat with the Calcasieu Parish Public Library. I'm going to be learning right along with you because I don't know how to sew.
So for all you beginners out there, we hope you enjoy this tutorial and remember to have fun. First, let's begin with some items you might need to start sewing. A small sewing kit like this can be purchased at most local stores as well as at specialty craft stores. Within these small kits, there are typically things like scissors, measuring tape, colorful spools of thread, a seam ripper, extra pins to hold fabric down, hand sewing needles, thimbles to protect your fingers, and a needle threader. These kits can sometimes contain things like buttons as well. There are also things like full spools of thread you can buy, and even find emergency sewing kits. These kits usually come pre-threaded, as well as have things like extra buttons or safety pins, and really come in handy when you're in a pinch. First, let's begin with the running stitch. The running stitch is one of the most basic stitches in hand sewing, as well as easy to do and versatile to use. To begin, you'll need a threaded needle, as well as the thread being knotted at the end. First, you're going to poke the needle through the back of the fabric and pull completely through, pulling tight at the very end. Next, you'll push the needle through the fabric, but not completely through, just halfway. And then after you push it through, you'll quickly push it back up through the top of the fabric, pulling the needle through. It's like a small roller coaster, going up and down through the fabric. You never want to pull the needle completely through into the back of the fabric when doing the running stitch. You need to push down and push back up very quickly. That's the running stitch. Next, let's move on to the back stitch. The back stitch is a strong stitch that is best used for holding pieces of fabric together. To begin the back stitch, you will do the same just like the running stitch, pushing the needle through and pulling completely tight. Next, you will go backwards and push the needle through and pulling it back up through the top of the fabric about a chain length away. This can get a little tricky since the back stitch is such a close stitch that if you don't push the needle up far enough away from the stitch, you'll do just like what I did and have your stitch much closer together. That is completely fine, but if you're looking to have even spaces, make sure you pay attention where you are putting the needle back through the fabric. The reason this is called the back stitch is because the needle and the thread go backwards into the fabric and then coming back up. Makes kind of like a loop, going down, backwards, and back up. You can also see at the back of the fabric the line the back stitch creates. This is what holds the fabric together so strongly. Next, we'll work on the slip stitch. The slip stitch is also called an invisible stitch, meaning it hides behind the fabric fold. For this, we are going to fold our fabric in half to create a small hemline. Now, unlike the running stitch or the back stitch, this needle doesn't go from behind the fabric, but rather on the inside of the fold of your hemline, where you'll pull the knot through so it hides under that fold. From here, you're going to take a very small piece of the fabric, pull your needle through, and then try to go behind the fold. And instead of pushing your needle up and through the fabric again, you're going to push it out into the fold and come up through the fabric further down the line, giving your thread some length to hold your hemline in place. Now this stitch is also sometimes called a ladder stitch because if you were to open the stitch, you can see it makes small steps like a ladder. Now we'll try this stitch one more time. Again, you go into your fabric and pick up just a small amount of the fabric. Pull your needle through and then try to go behind the hem, push the needle through under the fold, and then come back up at a further distance and pull tight. And see how you cannot see the stitching once pulled tight. Finally, we have the whip stitch. The whip stitch is probably the most universal stitch you'll use when fixing any type of garment or issue. The whip stitch can start just like the slip stitch under a fold or flap, or it could start behind the fabric just like the running stitch or the back stitch. It really doesn't matter how that stitch starts. What the whip stitch does is actually hold two pieces of fabric together, kind of locking in a loop around the two fabrics together. What this stitch does is wrap the string around the fabrics. So if you could see here, we're going to push the needle up and through both pieces of fabric, and this string whips over the two fabrics and locks them in place. So we'll do it one more time. Pull the string over, stick the needle through both pieces of fabric where it comes out on top, and it whips around, creating a diagonal loop around the fabric. Again, sticking in and through both pieces of fabric and whipping around, creating a loop over the fabric. And that is the whip stitch. Finally, we're going to learn how to sew on a button. Sewing on a button is a great and useful life skill and will help your garments last longer should they ever lose buttons. To start, we are going to begin with our threaded string as well as a knot at the very end of it. We are going to then pick up our fabric and push the needle through the back of the fabric and pull tight, just like we did with the running stitch as well as the back stitch. From here, we are going to get our button. Now, all buttons have a top face and a bottom face. Typically, the button with ridges on the sides, that's going to be the front face of your button. So that's what we're going to want to have showing. You're going to stick your needle through the back of the button and slide it down your string so it sits nice and well on the fabric. From here, you're going to take your needle and put it through the opposite hole that you initially slid the button through on your needle. So it'll begin to hold your button in place. And you're going to pull it all the way through the fabric and then come back up through the same first hole and pull through. This can sometimes take a minute. As you can see, It is a little hard to find a small hole with your needle, so it does take some time. Pull your needle all the way through and come back up and over, going down in the opposite hole across from where we started. Great. We're going to pull it tight. Make sure it's nice and tight on your fabric. Then you're going to do the same thing, but starting on an empty buttonhole. You're going to push your needle through, pull it all the way through, and again, push it back down into your fabric and on over the perpendicular stitch we just made. We're going to go one more time, push the needle through, up, pull tight, and then come back down. Pull it all the way through, make sure it's nice and snug. And there we have the X on our button. Now, the next part is going to be what we call making a shank. A shank is what gets the button through a hole a lot easier than it being just tight around the fabric. So we're going to stick the needle through the fabric, but not through the button. That's the most important part. You want to get your needle under the button, as close to the buttonholes and your stitches as you can. And then you're going to wrap your thread around the button a couple of times. This kind of elevates the button, so that way it gives it some leeway to fit through a buttonhole, and it's not just the fabric super tight against the button. It lets the button sit nicely inside a buttonhole. So we're going to pull that tight, and now we're going to take our needle after we've wrapped it around a couple of times. We're going to put it back through the fabric from under the button. We're not going through the button, we're putting it under the button. So it comes right on through, right where we were first stitching. And now all that's left is to just lock the button in place. So you're going to quickly poke your needle through the fabric like we did with the running stitch, just in and out very quickly. And you're going to create a loop, and in that loop you're going to put the needle through the loop. And sometimes this does happen where your thread gets tangled. Don't be scared about that. It happens. Just untangle it and keep going. A way to stop that is to actually coat your threading in beeswax, and they do sell that at various stores as well as at crafting stores, specifically for your threads. Again, you're going to push the needle through. See, we're going to lock it one more time, lock it in place. There is a loop, and we're going to stick the needle through that, pull up, and pull tight. And that will keep your button in place for a very long time. I personally like to lock or knot the ends of my work. It's just habit, I guess, and peace of mind. But the lock stitch that we just did, which is what I showed you, is going to be more than enough. And there we have our button sewed on nice and tight. We hope you enjoyed learning the basics of hand sewing and encourage you to keep on practicing. Until next time, bye!